Now, the announcement has been made today by the British Horse Racing Authority and Aintree Racecourse about modifications to the Grand National following the sad deaths in the race this year of Synchronised, the Gold Cup winner, and According to Pete. I'm joined on the line now by Jamie Stier from the British Horse Racing Authority. He is the Director of Race Day Operations and Regulation for the British Horse Racing Authority. Welcome, Jamie, to the show.
Hi Lydia, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good. I wonder if you could just briefly take me through what happened from Grand National Day to where we came to today, where the news came out. Who did you consult and what did you do between then and now?
Well, Lydia, if we start on race day itself, we said publicly at that stage that we wished to look at on the work we did last year, build upon that, and that was an extensive project, and overlay this year's race on top of that and see where that would take us. So the first step, so far as we were concerned, was to look at the unfortunate falls or fatalities of both Synchronised and According to Pete, and we issued a release on that in May stating that both those falls, in our opinions, were accidents. They were not foreseeable, and that concluded that matter so far as we were concerned. We then also considered the start of the race, which I think it's fair to say was generally considered by most to be unsatisfactory. And whilst we were satisfied that in form all 40 riders had in some way breached the starting regulations, it was considered appropriate, and we say wisely so, not to proceed with any direct action against the riders or find them in breach of the rules, but rather to commence a consultation process to try and work out why those sets of circumstances arose.
OK, just to briefly take you back to that May report, I read some reports at the time which said that report had concluded that the deaths of the two horses were preventable. Is that right?
No, we're not preventable.
Not preventable, right?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I've read a report that said exactly the opposite, right? Yeah. So you felt that the conclusion of all of that was that it was accidental and that there were not circumstances that were foreseeable or could be changed.
That's or were preventable in those circumstances in the context of this year's race.
So why? Many people will ask. So why are any changes being made?
Well, I think the changes are part of our ongoing considerations regarding the Grand National, and we always, as we said frequently, we always keep an open mind going forward. That's what responsible regulation is about, Lydia, addressing the situation, seeing how they're being made. And you'll notice a good part of this year's report focuses on the start, and I said to you just a short time ago that I think in most people's eyes the start of this race was unsatisfactory, albeit that people should be reminded that the circumstances which led to it were somewhat unusual, with the unseating of Tony McCoy and the flow-on effects of that.
Yes, absolutely. I think we all remember that. Well, let's go through the changes that is being made to the start and the starting procedure with you. We've preceded them with a caption for everybody at home, and we've pointed out the start to be moved forward by 90 yards. There's a new race distance of 4 miles and 3.5 furlongs, which I feel a little sad about. Starting no-go zone extended to 30 yards. Starter's rostrum position moved. Start tape to be changed. Address the charge to the tape from this autumn. Specific briefing between the starter team and jockeys on Grand National Day. Additional measures for riderless horses prior to the start. If we move forward through them one by one, the start to be moved forward by 90 yards. What will be the benefit of that, please?
Yeah, well, I think, Lydia, the first two are probably linked, aren't they? And the moving of the start relates to a change in distance, albeit not a significant one. And the interesting thing is, when speaking about this with jockeys and trainers, and we have consulted extensively with both those representative groups, they say and they agree in the context of the race it will have no bearing on the manner in which it is run. They have said that, and they've been quite open about that, whilst some of them certainly would prefer for that change not to occur, but they do accept, however, it won't change the context of the race. What that does, Lydia, by moving it forward by that slight distance, is it provides a quieter area. Now, the quieter area will mean, or the objective of trying to obtain that quieter area is to have a calmer, more controlled marshalling area for the horses prior to the race, so that they won't be building up the metabolic heat that they currently do and won't be as fizzed up. And also the riders in a quieter zone we're hoping will be calmer. It will also improve the capability of the starters to communicate more accurately with the jockeys, because the noise won't be such that that some riders have expressed in the past they've had difficulty hearing the starters' orders. So if we can get a calmer environment, hopefully that will impact on the horses and have a positive impact on them and the riders as they set off for the race.
I think anyone can see that is a sensible measure. However, presumably that brings the start of the race closer to the first fence. Is there any risk involved about reducing that distance to the first fence, about horses and riders being able to get a clear sight of the first obstacle in time?
No, Lydia, no rider or trainer has expressed that opinion to us. And from the information that we can see, we don't believe that will be a problem. We believe there's still a sufficient run, and I haven't got the exact distance in front of me, and I apologise for that, but it's still a considerable run, well in excess of, it's around about a furlong and a half, if I'm correct, at around 300 metres down to the first fence, and that we believe will provide them with sufficient sufficient space to set themselves for where they want to be for the fence one.
Small tangent, just before we go to the starting no-go zone. You mentioned no jockey or trainer has expressed a concern about that to you. How were they able to do that? How were they consulted? What was the process?
We held a meeting with each the jockeys separately from the trainers at Warwick Racecourse one day, where there was a representative group present for each body, and additionally then if some people that we had hoped to speak to were not free to make it to those meetings, we then contacted them by telephone and spoke with them and gathered thoughts in the initial stages. We then went away and considered those, and we looked at the practicality of some of their thoughts. And then in recent days we've contacted everyone we've spoken to, talked them through where we believe today's announcement would take us, and so they're aware, and we've discussed each of the changes with them, Lydia.
OK. Going back to the list of changes, the starting no-go zone extended to 30 yards. Please explain what you mean by no-go zone.
Lydia, there's a line on the track which up to this year has been around 15 metres or 15 yards from the starting tape, and realistically what the riders are asked is not to cross that line until the starter says go. So they marshal behind that line and they ought not cross it. Now, one of the complications is that currently when a horse does breach that line, because of its proximity to the tape, they often find themselves making contact with the tape, breaking the tape, and the likelihood. So we feel that by doubling that distance at least, having the horses further back off the start tape, should a horse breach the white line, the likelihood of it breaking the tape, therefore necessitating a delay to the start, is lessened, and the jockeys have been very supportive of that.
OK, and the movement of the starters rostrum?
Again, that's to take, and most jockeys, I think if we're realists, most jockeys truly don't focus on the line. They tend to focus more on the starter. They take the cue off the starter. So if we move the starter back away from the tape, and they are taking the cue off the starter, again, it should keep them away from the tape.
OK, and more user-friendly start tapes to be used. Is this just for the Grand National or in general?
Well, of course, we use different starting mechanisms on the Grand National course than we do on many other courses. So, and what we mean there is simply, I think people would appreciate the difficulty the attendants had replacing the tapes at the start of this year's race, and it's just making the mechanism whereby they attach the tape to the starting mechanism more user-friendly.
OK. The next initiative is a concerted drive to address the sometimes faster approaches towards the tape which can occur in bigger races in the jump season. I mean, it is one of the bugbears of people watching on from jump racing that there seems to be a sort of lackadaisical attitude towards getting a good position at the start for some jumps races. And once you get a big race, suddenly the start is all important and people are jostling to get a good position, and hence you get this sort of charge to the first fence. So is what's going to happen here not just going to look at the Grand National, but trying to get more consistency to starts no matter how important the race is?
Exactly, Lydia. It's, I think we've got to be careful. We shouldn't... obviously, it's up to the jockeys how they choose to ride the start and position their horse, as you referred to there. But what we're about here is trying to have a clear and proper understanding by all the riders of what is accepted conduct and what is not, meaning that that they will be pulled up throughout the season, and the rules are in place, but they will be applied more rigidly than they have previously been. So the riders have a clear understanding of what is expected of them at the start, and again, it's hoped that if that is consistently applied, that will become their everyday behaviour. Now, whether or not that will still lead to them reacting differently at the start of feature races, I guess time will tell. But the one thing is the riders are hugely supportive of this, and I'm not sure, but I think it may have even been them in many aspects that push strongly for this to apply throughout the season, Lydia.
The other changes that are being made, if we move on to a sort of quick précis of the other things that are being changed that are not to do with the start, they involve fence design, Becher's Brook specifically, landing areas, field size, investment in irrigation, riderless horses. Which of these, I mean, are there any that you wish specifically to comment on here?
Yes, I think the fence design one is a great step forward, Lydia. It's addressing the central core to the fences, and I hope people understand what we're saying. It's important that people understand that the fences outwardly will have exactly the same appearance as they currently do. They'll be dressed in exactly the same manner, and they will be exactly the same height as they currently are. But in the internal framework, there will be a change to make them more user-friendly, with the idea of lessening the likelihood of a horse sustaining a significant injury should they come into contact with the core. Now, that's not to say that you will prevent all injury, because as we've said many times, racing is a sport of risk, and we should acknowledge that and not step away from it. But what this will do, hopefully, is, as I say, lessen the likelihood, but at the same time, we've been very conscious in when we've been going through our development of having both the riders and the horses respect the fence.
Okay.
But people ought not be of the opinion that the fences will now have become soft fences and horses and riders will just have no regard for them. I can assure you, Lydia, that riders and horses ought still properly respect the fences.
I know I have another interview to go to, but I have two more questions to ask you. The first one is, the RSPCA have made a statement welcoming many of the proposed changes. However, they say that they remain concerned about two significant issues: the impact of Becher's Brook and the decision not to reduce the field size. Why has nothing been changed for both of those things?
Well, everything we've said about doing, Lydia, is evidence-based. If we go to field size, first of all, as I alluded to earlier on in our interview, the unfortunate circumstances regarding, according to Pete and Synchronised this year, there is no evidence to suggest they were in any way related to field size. And I think people ought to be reminded that when, according to Pete's unfortunate accident took place, there were only 17 horses remaining in the field at that time. In regard to Becher's Brook, yes, Synchronised did fall at that time, as have other runners, but it was not Becher's Brook which caused Synchronised fatal injury. And this year, you've got to remember that we had in place new changes, and I think that people ought to understand that on a one-off running, we ought to be guarded about taking what occurred in this year as a basis on which to bring about significant change. We'd ask that people allow time for the changes which have taken place and which we say are good changes, Lydia, that they be given time to bed in.
Well, finally, you bring me neatly to my last question. You pointed out that changes have only had 1 year airing at Aintree, with how few races are actually held over the Grand National course. Isn't it a risk that British Racing, the British Horse Racing Authority, Aintree have made a knee-jerk reaction to just 1 year's evidence of changes? And isn't this just an admission that every time that there is a fuss, that there will be a reaction by Aintree, by the British Horse Racing Authority? I mean, the RSPCA have specifically said this is the BHA's last chance to show that Beech's Book can pose a fair and safe challenge to horse and jockey. They've also said that they'll ask for more equine officers to be present at Aintree and will pay even closer attention to the conduct of the 2013 Grand National and its welfare outcome. Given that you have said that the 2 deaths last year were not preventable and that none of these changes are going to be able to address that risk, aren't we just lining ourselves up for, we, racing, having to make yet another change if something should happen this year? And the likelihood it probably will do.
No, far from it, Lydia. I think people need to understand, as I said, these changes need to be given time to bed in. I think that we have to accept, and it's our responsibility to accept, that the sport is a dangerous sport, and unfortunately you will not be able to ever remove the risk from it in the very same way you cannot remove the risk from a horse sustaining an injury, a fatal injury, even whilst playing in the field. So I think people need to understand that. I think the changes that have been brought about this year are not in relation to the changes of last year. They've addressed different areas, being the start, which was the one that we've focused upon, and the other changes such as the fence cores and the irrigation are all things that in last year's report we said would be subject to research and development programs. So we've held true to that, and when I say we, I mean the authority and Aintree. We've worked hand in hand through this, and we've made good on what we said in last year's report, and all 30 of those recommendations have been carried through, and we've now addressed any additional concerns that may have arisen.
So you're not shuffling deck chairs on a slow-moving liner towards an iceberg?
We're confident in the changes we've made, Lydia.
Jamie, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.